The Heritage Corporation, the world's largest producer of cultural heritage video, is proud to bring you the story of your name. It's a story that has been prepared by a team of dedicated professionals, experts in genealogy, heraldry, and history. It's the proud story of your unique Irish heritage. At the end of this video, we'll give you helpful information about touring Ireland. We'll give you a list of our extensive range of name videos, not only Irish, but Scottish and Welsh too. And we'll show you some other attractive gifts that are specific to Irish family names. But for now, sit back and relax as the Heritage Corporation takes you on a very special journey into your past.
Gallagher is an old name, a very old name. But nothing in Ireland, except maybe the land itself, is as old as Newgrange. This ancient tomb was nearly 2,000 years old at the birth of Christ. For 5,000 years it has witnessed the arrival of the many and varied peoples who came to our shores. And sadly too has seen the departure of millions of Irish men and women who today are scattered all over the world.
So let us go then, you and I, on an Irish journey, an hour's journey only, but endless in the imagination. A journey right through this beautiful country of ours, along the coasts and into the very lands and territories of your own Irish ancestors.
These are the majestic cliffs of Moher. They stand defiant, holding back the relentless waves. Below, the broad Atlantic stretches all the way 3,000 miles beyond to the New World. When you stand on these cliffs, you stand on the edge of Ireland, you stand on the edge of Europe. Inland from here lies the fair land of Erin, Ireland, the home of your ancestors.
This is the story of your great Gallagher heritage, a story which will take you on a journey back to discover the ancient land of Donegal, homeland to a people known as the Kennel Conil, the earliest ancestors of the Gallaghers, the story of the great Gallagher victory over the Norman invaders in the 12th century and of their tragic defeat at the hands of Murtagh O'Connor. We will hear too of Anne Gallagher, who set sail for America in the 19th century, and through her discover how you can start the search for your own ancestors. A search which will reveal the spirit of courage and fortitude that is the Gallagher heritage. A spirit and a heritage which have seen the name survive for nearly 1,000 years. Irish surnames, which began 1,000 years ago, developed in a number of ways. If a family took their father's name, they became known as Mac, like McCarthy, because Mac means the son of. But if they were called after a more remote ancestor, they used the O, which means descended from, as in, say, O'Brien. Meanwhile, the Normans often used Fitz instead of O or Mac, as in Fitzgerald, son of Gerald. Or you could be called after the job you did, as in Smith. Or the place you came from, as in Welsh, from Wales. For the 60 million people throughout the world who share an Irish ancestry, St. Patrick's Day is a time for them to come together to celebrate and rejoice in their Irish identity. Although your own family may have left these shores and settled in new lands, it is still possible to trace your ancestors back to their original homelands. Tom Lindert, one of Ireland's leading authorities on genealogy, has some useful advice.
Well, it's very important that if someone's interested in doing your genealogy, that you get all your background information in your home country first. Don't just try to jump straight over to Ireland. The first thing is that you get a person that you know the most about from Ireland, be it an ancestor, their name, a date to put them in history, be it a birth date, marriage date, or death date, and then a locality, narrow that down as much as possible, be it a county or a townland. But make sure you have the information together to begin with, and then make the next step over to do research in Ireland.
Once you have located an ancestor and have some idea of where they originally came from in Ireland, the records which will allow you to trace your family history are, by and large, available to you. The first place to go to is the National Archives at the Four Courts in Dublin. Documents kept here, such as Griffith's land valuations of the 19th century and the Ty the Plotman books, are invaluable in the search for your ancestors. If we take the case of a namesake of yours, we can illustrate exactly how these documents can help you. Let's look, for example, at the case of Anne Gallagher. We know that Anne left Ireland in 1890 for America, where she eventually married. We also know that the name Gallagher at that time was most common in the counties of Donegal, Mayo and Sligo. At the Four Courts, we searched Griffith's valuations and found Anne's family in Callantober, Achonry Parish, County Sligo. Once we had located Anne in Achonry, we found in the Catholic parish church that Anne was baptized there on the 30th of December 1874, the daughter of Patrick Gallagher and Bridget Walsh of Callantober, County Sligo. With this knowledge, it is possible to trace the history of Anne's family. So you see, all you need are the basic details about an ancestor, and the quest for information on your family roots can begin. The search for your ancestors is becoming easier all the time, thanks to a recent initiative called the Irish Genealogical Project. This is the Clare Heritage Centre in Corofin. The centre is at the very heart of a new and exciting development. The official surviving records relating to family history and genealogy are being collected throughout the county. They're being brought here and then put on computer. But Corofin's not alone in this. Many other heritage centres have opened up all over Ireland, so that no matter where your family comes from, you should now be able to get an accurate record of your family history. It is possible to trace your ancestors even further back beyond your immediate family, but let's start at the beginning and take a look at the history, the culture, and the country which shaped your forefathers. On the Aran Islands off the west coast of Ireland stands the prehistoric fort of Dún Aengus, enigmatic, poised over the ocean, its ancient builders a mystery even to this day. Over 7,000 years had passed since the first settlers arrived in Ireland. Hunting in the young forests, they slowly ventured up the river valleys, building their dwellings from rough wood and animal hide, and forming small communities hidden in the forest. 2,500 years before Christ, they had developed a society that was stable enough and wealthy enough to produce these majestic dolmens. This dolmen here is the Paul na Brone dolmen, situated
and North Clare in the Burren country. Just another part of the wonderment that is ancient Ireland.
They built mysterious circles of standing stones. These people we call the Firbolg, or the Fomorians, and the Tuatha De Danann, the legendary children of Dana, goddess of magic. Perhaps these early peoples were among your forebears, people who would have known the names of those who lie under the great dolmens. But older than Paul na Brone, older even than the pyramids, is the passage grave at Newgrange in County Meath. Built over 5,000 years ago and designed so that on the winter solstice each year, at the moment of sunrise, a shaft of sunlight penetrates to the very heart of the mound, illuminating the intricate spirals carved in stone. Newgrange was where they paid tribute to their now forgotten gods. These people were superb craftsmen in stone, but a new material was sweeping across Europe from Asia Minor. The Iron Age came to Ireland, and the people who introduced the new material around 500 BC were the Celts, who for almost 2,000 years ruled Ireland as kings. The Celts were a major influence on the course of Irish history and instrumental in shaping our unique Irish identity. Let's listen to what leading archaeologist Barry Raftery of University College Dublin has to say about the Celts.
Well, in the narrowest sense, the term Celtic refers to a language, but it is entirely appropriate to use the term in a broad cultural context. Now, the earliest reference to the term Celt was made by the Greeks about the 6th century BC. They just referred to a specific cultural grouping in Europe as Keltoi. We do not, of course, know whether the Celts themselves used that phrase to describe themselves. Now, in archaeological terms, the Celtic culture begins about 700 BC in Europe, continues until it was destroyed by the Romans around about the birth of Christ. And archaeologists have divided this culture into two broad phases, named after two major find spots in Europe: an earlier phase, which is called the Hallstatt culture, and a later phase, which is called the Latin culture. This is the Latin Celts who are best exemplified in the archaeological record. There are very serious problems of archaeological interpretation. But what we can say is that the earliest indications of contact with the Celtic culture abroad appears in Ireland around about 600 BC, when there are some indications of a Hallstatt presence in the country. We have some Hallstatt material, but it's not very substantial. Around about 300 BC, there's a greater body of archaeological material in the country, which we can certainly equate with the Celtic groups. In many ways, it displays native Irish idiosyncrasies which set it apart from the material in the Latin areas outside the country. We have a vast body of Celtic literature surviving in the country. We have the epic cycle, the Ulster cycle, we have the Fíneachta, we have a whole range of mythology, we have a superb collection of early Irish nature poetry and other poetry, but probably the principal legacy of the Celts, the most enduring, is our Celtic personality. We certainly have a distinctive personality, a warmth, a friendliness. The classical commentators describe the belligerent character of the Celts. Perhaps we have inherited that too, to a certain extent. But we certainly have a distinctive Celtic personality which sets us apart from all other European cultures.
A small island on the edge of Europe, the island of your ancestors was divided up between a number of major Celtic clans. In the south, in what is now Munster, were the Oinecht and the Dalcash. In Connacht, to the west, were the Ibrin. In the province of Leinster were the Chinslig, and to the north, in Ulster, were the Nael. These clans were in time joined by the great Viking and Norman families. It was from the Enail of Ulster that the name of Gallagher first originated. Here I am, high up in the Mourne Mountains in the County Down. To the east, they sweep majestically down to the Irish Sea, while to the west, they overlook the vast lands of Ulster. These windswept mountains have seen generations of Gallaghers march through the annals of Irish history. For in these Mourne Mountains, you're at the very heart and centre of your great Gallagher story. From the mountains of Mourne to the majestic cliffs of Slieve League, Ulster is a varied and beautiful land, steeped in history and rich in scenic variety. This spectacular province is the ancient homeland of the Gallaghers. The story of the Gallagher name starts in the swirling dawn of the early centuries with three brothers of the mighty Enail clan, Conall, Owen and Éanna. The first two of these brothers, Conall and Owen, settled in the northern peninsula of Inishowen. Owen and his descendants started to build a kingdom for themselves to the east, but Conall and his people looked west and settled a land which became known as Tir Conall, or as we know today, Donegal. This land they ruled from the fortress of Gallagher on the Inishowen Peninsula. In the time before surnames, these people were simply known as the Kinál Conall. From out of the ranks of these people, there came a fearless warrior by the name of Gallagher. He fathered a family who in time took the surname O'Gallagher. This family became one of the senior and, it is said, most loyal branches of the Kinál Conall. They ruled from Ballybait and Ballinaglack, and in time their lands spread over most of what is now Donegal. In the course of time, the Gallagher name did spread to other parts of Ireland, but like most Irish families with strong roots associated with a particular place, the Gallaghers are still to be found in greatest numbers in the homelands of their ancestors. Hurling, Ireland's national sport, is reminiscent of the time when the great clans of Ireland battled for land power and the high kingship. It was the strength of Christianity that forged the first real bonds of unity in Ireland, for the Irish took very well to Christianity, so well indeed that in a very short time her monks had established some of the most important ecclesiastical centres in the Christian world. Here in Glendalough in County Wicklow, I always think the sense of Ireland's Christian past is particularly strong. There had been small settlements of monks scattered along the Irish coast for some time, but it took St. Patrick to bring together the old religion of the Celts and the new Christianity. This new Irish Christianity turned out to be a powerful crusading force. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe was once more plunged into the Dark Ages. And strangely enough, that's what gave us, I think, our first emigrants, the young Irish monks who left their Irish monasteries and brought the flame of Christianity back into that pagan continent. At home in Ireland, the monks built the unique round towers, originally as bell towers, and then later used them for keeping safe their priceless chalices and manuscripts. In their workrooms, the monks channeled their passionate Celtic sensitivity into glowing colour and intricate artwork. And certainly, the greatest and most beautiful of the manuscripts is the Book of Kells, now in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. The work of the monasteries, however, was to be disturbed by the arrival of the Vikings. For 200 years, they came as pirates to plunder gold from the great Irish monasteries. However, in 1014, they were finally defeated in battle by the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, after which they became fully integrated into Irish society. The Vikings built Ireland's first towns and cities, including Dublin, Wexford, Cork, and Limerick. And their commercial ability is reflected today in Dublin's famous Moore Street Market. The Vikings left an indelible impression on the Irish. Their decline, coupled with the death of Brian Boru, meant that the high kingship of Ireland was, so to speak, up for grabs. There followed almost a century of political instability and unrest, while the greater Irish families fought amongst themselves for the title of High King of Ireland. It was an eventful century in the history of the Gallagher family. They were of the Kineal Connell, the same as the O'Donnells of Donegal, who had long been excluded from the kingship of Ulster. In the unruly times that followed, the Gallaghers took every opportunity to advance themselves by allying themselves sometimes with the Ullaid of West Ulster and other times with the mighty O'Connors of Connaught. 100 years of shifting alliances and bitter infighting left not only your ancestors, but the whole country unprepared for the next wave of newcomers to land on Irish soil. The Normans, led by the great warrior Strongbow, arrived in 1169. Heavily protected by their coats of mail, they moved like modern tanks through the Irish countryside. They had arrived as mercenaries at the request of the deposed King of Leinster, but a combination of their military might and an attraction to the land of your ancestors induced them to make a more permanent foothold. The Normans immediately set about building huge stone castles of white throughout the country. These fortresses were designed both for protection and to intimidate the native Irish. Over 800 years later, many of these castles still stand, a testament to the skill of their builders. Within a year, they had captured Dublin itself, and from the high parapets of their various castles all over Ireland, they surveyed the conquered lands. Very soon, they were to proceed to supervise the division of their new country. The coming of the Normans had a profound effect upon the fortunes of the Gallagher family. Situated as they were in far-off Donegal, they were for a while well out of reach of the Normans. When the Normans finally did attack, the Gallaghers were ready for them and gave as good as they got. In the ensuing struggle, both sides quickly realized that alliances, particularly those formed in marriage, were a far better proposition than endless suspicion and confrontation. Following his victories in battle, Strongbow took the hand of the King of Leinster's daughter, Eva, in marriage, and less than 2 years later, he had taken the crown for himself. Stony towers are not always protective, for here in Waterford, at Reginald's Tower, the marriage of Strongbow and Eva started a trend that would eventually undermine Norman influence in Ireland. You see, within a century, the Normans and the Irish intermarried, and the Normans adopted the Irish language and culture to a degree that made the English King John declare, "The Normans are more Irish than the Irish themselves." The Normans under Maurice Fitzgerald reached the Gallaghers of Donegal in 1247, and a fierce battle ensued at Ballyshannon. Donegal was then plundered by Fitzgerald's men. The people of Donegal recovered slowly from this attack, but in 1257, an army of Gallaghers and O'Donnells crushed Fitzgerald's forces in a battle near Sligo town. At this time, the Gallaghers were elected marshals of the armies of Donegal. The Normans were not their only enemies at this time, and in 1388 Donegal was attacked by Murtagh O'Connor of Connaught. It is recorded that many Gallaghers were left dead and their homes left in ruins. It would appear that in the aftermath of this conflict, the Gallaghers separated into two distinct careers. Some continued the warrior tradition, but others began to make a name for themselves in church affairs. Here at Bunratty Castle, the vibrant atmosphere of that period can be experienced in a banquet that is faithfully recreated using historical records from the time.
My noble lords and ladies, my noble guests, the entry of your host this evening, the Earl of Thomond, Mr. Joe Lynch.
food and drink in the old style, music and song. This is how your ancestors entertained their friends.
This castle now awakes. Its ancient glory stirs. The clink of mail and laughter fills its halls, and we inherit all its chivalry. Bunratty bids you welcome. A toast to all you hear. Slighter is sailed. Slighter is sailed.
Let the banquet begin.
In 1466, Lawrence Gallagher, described as a less than holy man, became Bishop of Raphoe. The diocese was subsequently held by 7 members of his family in the years that followed. The Gallagher churchmen were not overly popular. In 1502, Arthur Gallagher and John O'Loyster both claimed authority over the abbey at Esrua. The dispute was unresolved, and they both died, strangely enough, on the same day. During the 1500s, the power of the Celtic chieftains began to wane under sustained military pressure from the forces of the English crown. This, in turn, led to a series of rebellions. The last great Celtic revolt ended here at Kinsale in 1601. It had been led by the mighty Hugh O'Neill of Tyrone. In the year 1609, O'Neill and many of the other Irish chieftains left our shores. This was called the Flight of the Earls. It heralded the end of the old Celtic ways. Now it was a new Ireland, new kings, new centres of power. The Flight of the Earls is a testament to the concept of Ireland as an independent nation, the Celtic aristocracy choosing exile rather than submission. To consolidate their power in Ireland, the new rulers sent out clerks to record the names of Ireland. Unable to speak the Irish language, these clerks did not attempt to properly translate the indigenous names, but rather made approximate and phonetic translations. As you travel through Ireland today, you will notice how the signposts carry evidence of that name-changing process which began so long ago. For example, Báile an Mhuircheig, meaning the town of the Murphys, became Ballymurphy. Cashlorin I Chunnell simply became Castleconnell. About this time, your name began to take on its present form. At the hands of the English-speaking clerks who knew no better, the old Irish name of O'Gallaghoid became O'Gallagher. Eventually, in some cases, the O was dropped, giving us the name Gallagher. In many cases, the spelling was the best approximation English clerks could make to the sound of this ancient and royal Irish name. The essential Irish culture, however, remains strong and vibrant, and despite continued assault, it has remained so to this day. The Irish have always been proud of their heritage and culture, and nowhere is this more evident than in the art of heraldry. And here to tell you more about that is the former Chief Herald of Ireland, Gerard Slevin.
Heraldry had its origin in the fact that the knight in medieval times, going into warfare, was completely encased in armor, including his head. So there was no means of knowing who he was. So it became the practice to paint on his shield certain emblems or signs or symbols as a means of identification. Heraldry has always had an extraordinary fascination for people, whatever it is about the shield shape and its contents. And in due course, this personal practice spread to cities, universities, institutions, and is still very active. The primary purpose, as I have suggested, was identification. And I suppose that is still the essential purpose of heraldry, is personal or institutional identification.
Your coat of arms is a window to your heritage. Each part is full of stories and secrets. The shield is said to be coloured argent, that is, silver or white. And this is the colour of peace and sincerity. Displayed against this is a black lion in what is called the rampant position, treading on a serpent. The lion is an ancient heroic symbol and is said to denote deathless courage. Its black colour signifies constancy or loyalty. The serpent has a unique relevance in an Irish context, dating back to the religion of the early Celts. It is said to signify fertility and renewal. The 8 trefoils on the shield are in fact shamrocks, the age-old floral device of Ireland. The crest, which is placed above the shield, is in the form of a red crescent, out of which a serpent is rising. The crescent here is a complex symbol. It could suggest the family's involvement in the Crusades to the Holy Land, or it could be a reference again to the old Celtic beliefs. For the Celts, the sun, moon, and stars were symbol of a divine order in the world and were invoked as witnesses to oaths and promises. The motto, which is in Latin, captures much of the spirit of this complex coat of arms. It reads, Mea gloria fides, meaning fidelity is my honour.
Many Irish people certainly are entitled to use arms, yes. The registers of the office of arms, the genealogical office, as it is now, the office of the Chief Herald, has registers going back many centuries.
The 17th century saw England convulsed by 2 civil wars in which Ireland inevitably became involved. The Second War was actually fought entirely on Irish soil between 1688 and 1691 and led to disastrous consequences for the Irish.
(1691) saw the ending of the Williamite Wars with the signing of the Treaty of Limerick, signed on this very stone. The wars were fought between 2 kings, William of Orange and James II, both of whom laid claim to the throne of England. In the event, victory went to King William. For the Irish who supported James II, exile seemed to be the only honourable option.
Known to history as the wild geese, these honourable soldiers of fortune sailed from Limerick to Europe, bringing with them the surnames of Ireland. The flight of the wild geese in 1691 saw many Gallaghers go along with them, but many others tried to evade the declarations of the treaty and remained behind secretly in Ireland. Their presence was detected sooner or later, and they were then declared outlaws. These men in turn were forced to leave the country quietly, and few records of their departure remain. But in the military lists of the nations of Europe, the name Gallagher is mentioned with honour, in particular that of Fear Durcha o Gallagher, gentleman and courageous soldier of the Irish Brigades. From the days of the early Christian missionaries to the present day, emigration has been an integral part of the history of the Irish people. From this small nation, millions of Irish people have traveled the world over to Europe, Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Australasia. Although many left in search of adventure or to find their fortunes, many others didn't have the choice. In the aftermath of the wild geese, which had seen the best and brightest of their day depart, Ireland was to undergo many changes, the most dramatic of which was the massive transfer of land ownership. As the land changed, so too did the politics. In 1801, the Irish Parliament in Dublin was dissolved, and as the last vestiges of power dwindled, so too did the wealth of the country, and the land sank into poverty. In 1845, a blight arrived. The potato, the staple diet of the Irish people, was totally destroyed. So began the great Irish famine. And so too began the greatest migration of the Irish people. Plentiful supplies of foodstuffs were exported to Britain, while the Irish people were faced with emigration in order to survive. A letter written in 1847 captures the sense of devastation. It is early morning as I write this last note before departing. We now join a huge army forced to leave their native land. The heavy morning mist is a fitting curtain for the final scene, the climax of all our strivings against impossible odds. I cannot help but glance back through the pages of our history to the years when Ireland was a beacon of learning and faith whose light spread to all parts of Europe. God grant that those days of glory may someday return. Irish people emigrated in their hundreds of thousands. They set sail from Cove, Liverpool and Belfast. Cramped together on overcrowded ships, rife with hunger and disease, they arrived in Montreal, New York and Boston. In Australia, famine refugees followed those who had been transported there as convicts. Many of these convicts had been expelled from their home country on charges such as stealing bread, others for belonging to revolutionary organizations. Despite their impoverished beginnings, the contribution made by those emigrants to their new countries was enormous. In the building of the modern world, from the late 17th century right up to the present day, the Irish have played a vital part in whatever society or culture they have settled in. Today, people of Irish descent number in excess of 70 million worldwide. The name Gallagher has always held an honorable place in history. People like Father Hugh Gallagher, the 19th century American frontier priest, William Davis Gallagher, the distinguished 19th century American poet, and in this century, the courageous war correspondent James Wes Gallagher. The list of distinguished Gallaghers is constantly growing.
Is tossa maroon, maroon, maroon. Is tossa maroon, is magragan. Is tossa maroon, is mahaman gobor. Shilma crackdown to wagon wood barring.
When you come to Ireland, there are many places you will want to go and many things you will want to see. But as a Gallagher, you really must come here to the Blue Stack Mountains, just north of Donegal town, with its views across the vast lands of Tyrconnell. For here is truly the gateway to your Gallagher heritage. From the earliest days of Irish history, the great name of Gallagher has been at the forefront of Irish life. Those Gallaghers who chose exile and emigration brought their traditions of courage with them to their new homes. Across the world, the name of Gallagher is carried with pride.
And when you do go to Ireland to trace your roots, here are some of the things you may want to know. Ireland is only 300 miles long and about 150 miles wide.